All right, this is the video that talks about squares. Now, I know all of you have heard squares and know the definitions, but we're going to talk more of the properties and different types of things that they exhibit. All right, so let's define it first. So a quadrilateral is a square if and only if it has 4 right angles, and I'm going to put 90-degree angles, and 4 congruent sides. Okay, so it has 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So I want to point out that it has 4 90-degree angles. That means that it is also a rectangle. Okay, but it also has 4 congruent sides, so it is also a rhombus. Okay, so after I paste this in to my interactive student notebook, I'm going to put a note either under it or below it, wherever you want to put it, that a square is also a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a rhombus, and therefore it exhibits properties of each. Okay, so it has the properties of a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a rhombus. All right, so let's look at example 1. We want to find the measure of AED. Okay, so we want to find the measure of this angle right here. All right, and it tells us that it is equal to 5x plus 5, and we want to solve for x. Well, if you remember, this is a square, and so a square is a rhombus, and one of the properties of a rhombus, so a rhombus property, is that its diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, its diagonals are perpendicular. And since a square is a rhombus, I totally misspelled that, rhombus, and it holds all properties of a rhombus, that means that this here has to be diagonal, which means it's a 90-degree angle. Okay, so if it is equal to 5x plus 5, we know that's going to equal 90. And now it's just simple algebra. So let's subtract 5 from both sides. I get 5x equals 85. Divide by 5 on both sides. I get x equals 17, and that's my answer. All right, so let's look at example 2 now. Example 2 says, if the measure of angle BAC is 5x, okay, so I'm going to label it 5x. We're talking about this angle right here. Find x. All right, so let's use what we know about squares or what we know about rectangles and rhombuses. All right, so let's start off, because it's a rectangle, we know that the measure of angle BAD has to equal 90 degrees. Okay, so this whole thing here is 90 degrees. Now this 5x isn't the whole thing, it's just part of it. But we know that a square is a rectangle, and rectangles, all angles are right angles. All right, now I can say, because a square is a rhombus, we know that one of the properties of a rhombus is that the diagonals, oh my gosh, I can't spell this morning, diagonals bisect corner angles, meaning that it cuts this 90-degree angle in half. So 90 divided by 2 is 45 degrees. So this here, let me change colors. This here is 45 degrees. And this here is also 45 degrees. Okay? Well, now that we know that 5x has to equal 45. Divide both sides by 5. X equals 9. All right, let's look at this final example, example number 3. All right, now it says if AD equals 8, find the length of BD. Okay, so we want to find the length of this, but all we know is that AD equals 8. Okay, I'm going to say BD, just to make things easier, I'm going to call it X because that's what we're trying to find. All right, well, I know that since this is a square, it's also a rhombus, which means that all sides are the same. So this is 8, this is 8, and this is 8, okay? Now if I focus on this rectangle, or this triangle, sorry, okay, I notice that this has to be 90 degrees. So this highlighted in purple is a right triangle. Okay, it looks like this. 8, 8, and X, if I kind of separate it from everything else. Okay, well, since it's a right triangle, I can apply the Pythagorean theorem. And you learned this in middle school, but this is a refresher if you don't remember. And the Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And this is a leg of a triangle, this is a leg of a triangle, and this is the hypotenuse. Okay, and remember the hypotenuse is the side opposite of the 90-degree angle. So this is my hypotenuse. Okay, so I'm going to set up an algebra problem. So I can say a squared, so 8 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared, which is x squared. Okay, so 8 squared is 64, so 64 plus 64 is x squared. 128 equals x squared. Now remember back from Algebra 1 in middle school, to undo a square, you square root it. So the square root of 128 is roughly 11.3. That equals x. And that is your final answer.